We can't do so without acknowledging the elephant in the room. President Trump continues to take direct aim at Canada. Well, he's going to really go after us now. I'm reading my speech. I just called him an elephant. But anyways, can't call that guy any name.
In a crowded ballroom at Toronto's Empire Club, Ontario Premier Doug Ford paused, smiled, and mentioned the elephant in the room. The audience laughed, but the message was unmistakable. For months, President Trump's latest tariff wave had unsettled both sides of the border. Duties on steel, autos, aluminum, lumber, even critical minerals. Washington called it strength. Ottawa called it provocation. Ford turned a luncheon into a defining moment. He told business leaders that Ontario would not be pushed around by U.S. policy. The mood changed instantly. What began as a light remark became a signal that Canada was ready to fight back. Trump's 2025 tariff expansion touched nearly every industry that links the two economies. Steel and aluminum face new surcharges. Auto parts, once exempt, were suddenly taxed. Furniture, copper, and heavy trucks joined the list. Even film and semiconductor manufacturing fell under Washington's widening national security umbrella. For Canada, the effect was immediate. Ontario alone exports more than $80 billion worth of manufactured goods to the United States each year. Every new duty squeezed margins and threatened factory jobs from Windsor to Hamilton. Ford's speech marked a turning point. He described these measures as a tax on a partner, not on a rival, and he acted before Ottawa could. Ontario introduced a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to New York, Michigan, and Minnesota, a signal that the province would no longer stay silent. At the same time, Queen's Park launched a $75 million Canadian dollar campaign built around Ronald Reagan's old warning against protectionism, running in both Canadian and U.S. markets. For Ford, it was as much about livelihoods as politics. Ontario's industrial belt depends on cross-border trade. His voters see the impact of every plant closure. Taking a stand wasn't symbolism, it was survival. Trump's plan sought to pull production back to America, but by October 2025, it was producing the opposite effect. Canadian manufacturers began investing in domestic supply chains. The Ontario Chamber of Commerce reported a 12% rise in new industrial permits during the third quarter, driven by steel finishing, auto components, and clean energy materials. Export Development Canada noted that more firms were seeking insurance and credit for European clients, reducing dependence on U.S. orders. Instead of weakening Canada, the tariffs pushed it toward greater self-reliance. In his address, Ford framed Ontario as capable of becoming one of the richest and most secure regions in the world if it harnessed its own talent and resources. Behind the optimism was calculation. By taxing electricity exports and promoting Made in Ontario, Ford leveraged the sectors where his province holds real power: energy, minerals, and advanced manufacturing. Analysts estimated Ontario's grid supplied roughly 6% of New York State's demand in 2024. Even a small surcharge reminded U.S. states how deeply their economies depend on Canadian energy. Meanwhile, data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics showed a 5-month decline in manufacturing employment through September 2025, with 78,000 fewer factory jobs than a year earlier. Ontario's policy response also had a psychological effect. Business confidence surveys by the Canadian Federation of Independent Business showed a steady climb through late 2025, reversing months of uncertainty. Companies that once delayed investment decisions began accelerating production to meet new domestic contracts, especially in transportation equipment and battery materials. The Ontario government set up a new task force connecting auto suppliers with provincial mining firms to ensure stable access to nickel, lithium, and copper, key components for EV manufacturing. These moves transformed the tariff shock into a catalyst for industrial planning. The shift may be modest in numbers today, but symbolically, it marked the rebirth of economic nationalism on Canadian terms. The irony was clear. A policy meant to protect American workers was beginning to erode their industries, exactly the kind of reversal Ford had warned about. The echo echoed far beyond Toronto. In Washington, officials were surprised not by Ottawa's diplomats, but by a provincial premier speaking directly to U.S. power. Regional leaders along the border quickly noticed. Governors from manufacturing states voiced concern about higher electricity prices and supply chain delays. Industry groups in the Great Lakes region called for clarity on tariffs, saying the back-and-forth measures were disrupting deliveries of parts and materials. Trump, accustomed to controlling every headline, suddenly faced a story he didn't script, a Canadian leader challenging his policy head-on. It underscored a shift among U.S. allies who have grown weary of uncertainty. In Europe, Japan, and South Korea, governments had already signed sectoral trade frameworks, setting tariff caps at 15%. Canada, bound by geography and supply chains, had less flexibility, until Ontario forced the issue. By standing firm, Ford reframed the conversation. Rather than pleading for relief, Canada was now seen as the steady player defending predictable rules in North American commerce. As the applause faded in the Empire Club ballroom, one thing was clear: the tone of Canada's relationship with Washington had changed. Ford's humor, his Reagan references, and his direct language toward Trump all served a purpose: to announce that Ontario would defend its economy on its own terms. The months ahead will test whether that strategy holds. The electricity surcharge, the advertising campaign, and the surge in local investment all signal a broader shift toward economic independence inside a volatile North American market. For the United States, the lesson is the same one history keeps repeating. Tariffs can buy leverage, but they can also breed isolation. When partners start protecting themselves instead of cooperating, the costs multiply on both sides of the border. What began as a push to reindustrialize America has instead encouraged Canada to do the same, not out of rivalry, but out of necessity. Ford's speech was more than a rebuttal. It was a turning point. Trump's tariff strategy aimed to reassert dominance. Instead, it awakened a new assertiveness in Canada, one that no longer fears the elephant in the room.
Tariffs on canola came up unexpectedly. If they can come on fast, then come off fast. And the Chinese are just going to want something in return.
This is something that the Prime Minister has been looking at. That being said, when it comes to EVs, you saw what we announced. First and foremost, we said that we would be lifting the ZAV mandate.
Just a few days ago, President Donald Trump renewed his call for allies to stand with the United States and punish China with higher tariffs. In his vision, Canada should act like a loyal soldier, following Washington's lead no matter the cost. Ottawa did not answer directly. Instead, it sent a very different signal. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government is now considering rolling back the 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, a tariff that was originally designed to keep pace with Washington. This move looks like a bucket of cold water thrown straight into Trump's face. While he praises America first and expects others to fall in line, Canada is showing that it is ready to step out of America's shadow to defend its own economy. The shift is not accidental. It comes after China retaliated with tariffs that crushed Canada's canola industry, a backbone of prairie agriculture. Farmers in Saskatchewan, the heartland of canola, are being squeezed. On one side, Ottawa's tariff wall on Chinese EVs. On the other, Beijing's 76% duty on canola imports imposed in mid-August. For farmers, this is not abstract geopolitics. It is a simple question of survival. Can they sell their harvest without losing money? When Premier Scott Moe returned from his mission to China with a message of more constructive talks than expected, it confirmed the pressure on Ottawa to shift course.
The EV tariff was first introduced to shield Canada's auto sector and align with Washington's strategy against Beijing. But the cost has been severe. Beijing struck back by targeting canola, one of Canada's most valuable farm exports. With duties near 76%, farmers now face the prospect of selling their harvest below production cost. Scott Moe's trip to Beijing provided a rare opening. He met directly with the officials who imposed the tariffs and described the discussions as unexpectedly positive. When he returned, Carney publicly thanked him, a gesture that showed Ottawa now sees the crisis for prairie farmers as urgent as protecting auto workers. Canada is stuck in a trade-off that pits crops against cars, and the balance can no longer hold. In Ottawa, the tone is clearly shifting. Foreign Minister Mélanie Joly has acknowledged the government is reviewing the EV tariff and exploring new imports from Japan, South Korea, and Europe. That is a clear departure from the firm stance of earlier months. On the Chinese side, the revival of the Joint Economic Trade Commission after 7 years shows Beijing is willing to re-engage. Premier Mo reported the Chinese officials expressed a readiness to look forward rather than back. These developments suggest the two sides are testing ways to recalibrate their trade relationship, not only on canola, but in a broader framework.
If Canada removes the EV tariff, the immediate effect would be relief for farmers. China could ease its duties, restoring access to a premium market that Canadian producers rely on. Consumers would benefit from cheaper electric vehicles, though domestic manufacturers would face new competition. Ottawa could also seize the chance to demand that Chinese automakers build plants in Canada, creating jobs and strengthening supply chains. The political dimension is equally important. On the surface, this looks like a direct snub to Trump, who has urged Ottawa to join his tariff wall against Beijing. But in practice, it is more about pragmatism than open defiance. Canada cannot afford to sacrifice its farm economy simply to stay in Washington's good books, especially when Trump's own tariffs continue to hit Canadian metals, lumber, and energy exports. By recalibrating, Canada is signaling that it will defend its own workers and industries first. It is not abandoning the United States, but it is refusing to blindly follow. In today's fractured global economy, such independence may be the only way for Canada to navigate between two superpowers without losing its footing at home.
The headlines concerning ag-related bankruptcies are on the rise.
Farmland here in the Midwest is abundant, with farmers growing corn, soybeans, alfalfa, dairy, and beef. But recently, in the first quarter of this year, many farmers couldn't repay their debts.
Farmers are under a tremendous amount of economic stress.
Across America's farmland, daily life is filled with challenges. Weather, debt, and volatile prices already weigh on farmers. In 2025, tariffs have made the burden heavier. President Trump's trade war is not an abstract debate in Washington. It is a reality shaping whether family farms can survive another season.
We worry about drought, we worry about pricing, we worry about equipment, we worry about financing. This tariff is just another thing that we have to worry about.
Soybean farmers in Iowa, who depend heavily on exports, are facing deep uncertainty. China, the largest buyer of soybeans worldwide, has not pre-purchased shipments for this year's harvest. Normally, China takes more than 1/5 of U.S. exports. Without that market, bins of soybeans may sit unsold, while bills for fertilizer and equipment keep climbing. John Deere has warned that tariffs on steel and aluminum will add $600 million to its costs in 2025. Those increases trickle down to every farmer who needs a tractor or a part repaired. The story of soybeans captures the larger picture. American agriculture produces far more than the nation consumes, which means exports are essential. When tariffs close doors abroad, farmers cannot simply sell everything at home. Prices drop and revenue shrinks. This is not a new problem. In the 2018 trade dispute, retaliatory tariffs from China cost U.S. agriculture $27 billion, with soybeans alone making up 71% of the losses. Now history is repeating. Brazil has taken advantage of the opening, surpassing the United States as the world's leading soybean exporter. Farmers in the Midwest watch as markets they spent decades building slip away. Meanwhile, the costs of production continue to climb. Fertilizer, farm machinery, and fuel all carry higher prices because of tariffs on metals and other inputs. What was once a narrow profit margin has been squeezed to the breaking point. The financial stress is showing up in bankruptcy courts. In the first quarter of 2025, farm bankruptcies under Chapter 12 rose 95% compared to a year earlier, according to federal filings. Chapter 12 is a special part of U.S. bankruptcy law created for farmers and fishermen. It allows them to reorganize debts and keep their farms running while they work out a payment plan, rather than being forced to sell everything at once. In 2024, farmers in the Midwest filed 71 of these cases, a 69% increase from 2023. Behind every statistic is a family under pressure, often losing land and machinery after generations of work. When small and medium-sized farms collapse, their assets are usually purchased by large agribusiness operations. The trend toward consolidation accelerates, leaving even less space for family farms that still make up 95% of America's agricultural backbone. For many, the promise that tariffs would shield rural America rings hollow. Instead, they feel exposed to forces beyond their control, with little protection as prices drop and debts mount. Farming is more than business. It is legacy, culture, and identity. Yet that legacy is now at risk. Exports are falling, bankruptcies are rising, and uncertainty is spreading across the countryside. Even with new federal commitments, such as the $65 billion in agricultural spending signed into law in July, most of the money is directed toward crop insurance and disaster assistance. Those programs may soften the impact of bad weather, but they cannot restore lost markets or stabilize prices. American farmers know the stakes. Without reliable trade partners and consistent policy, no amount of short-term aid will be enough. What they need is clarity, not chaos. They need stability, not shifting tariffs. Until that arrives, the reality remains the same. Trump's tariffs are leaving America's farmers squeezed between falling crop prices and rising costs, struggling to hold on to their land and wondering if the family farm can survive another year.